Good. Hello, everyone. I think we have a global attendee list, so I would say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. First of all, thanks for joining the conversation today. It's busy times, and we value your time, and thanks for spending the next 60 minutes with us. We have a jam-packed agenda, and I think we have a topic which speaks for itself. Today, we want to dive deep into how the MarTech stack is changing in the age of AI, and what does this mean for customer data in general? What does this mean in return to the discussion? Either tend to a packaged or composable CDP. How is the whole stack bending? And that's where we want to spend the next 60 minutes with you. Let's give a quick hello from your two hosts today. My name is Constantin Hourmouzis. Been in marketing, I think 13 years now. Started as product manager, 5 years in industry, and now 8 years with PwC. Always spent the time around big marketing transformation, solving questions. How can companies get the most out of their customer data? How does the marketing organization of the future look like? And in the end, how does technology enable to accelerate business outcome? And I'm happy to join the conversation with Projjol. Projjol, please say a few words to yourself.
Sure, my pleasure, Constantine. Thank you very much. Very happy to be here. I am one of the founders and the Chief Product Officer at Zeotap. So I've been here now 11 years. And it's been exciting, as we were just chatting, to be at the center of what's been a rapidly transforming landscape. Everything around first-party data strategies has changed so much and continues to change and evolve at a rapid pace. We work with top-tier brands across Europe and the Middle East. I'm excited to share some learnings with you over the next hour or so. Thanks, Konstantin.
Great to have you. Good. Let's have a quick look on the agenda. I think I must say we love questions from the audience. Please, a webinar just it becomes more fun if you raise your points and comments. I think we have the Q&A possibility. So we will take some time at the end to go through your points. We will go through this webinar in three sections. First of all, we give a little bit the macro perspective on how the new MarTech stack is changing and evolving. Then, Projjol, you will talk about how Zeotap is actually evolving and changing and adopting to the changing market. And then we will look on the business case and say, hey, what does this mean if companies are now at the edge of either going on a composable or a packaged solution? Where does the different CDP solutions differ? We'll dive deep on that. And then at the end, we have some time for Q&A. Good. I would say let's jump right into it. How is the new MarTech stack changing, or what's happening from a macro perspective? And I think it's easy to say, if we come from a consumer expectation point of view, obviously all of us, and I think this information is table stakes. Everyone tries to be treated uniquely. I think it's common knowledge that obviously if consumers, they should be personalized, and it's impacting brand choices, and personalized experience leads to more revenue, to more sales. I think it's clear that consumer expect this. But the question is, why does it so rarely, or why is it so challenging for marketers to achieve this? And I think there are a couple of reasons. First of all, for most of the companies, the customer journey has become much more complex. With new channels popping up here and there, it's becoming increasingly more difficult to measure now with GPT tools rising. I think the conversion just got one more difficult step to take and to follow. So I think the customer journey gets much more complex. And at the same time, the amount of noise out of companies, out of consumers as a self is increasing. So it becomes more difficult actually to reach your customers. And I think third point I want to make is privacy regulations. Obviously not a new topic, but I think it adds a lot of technical complexity. I think for us consumers, it's a great thing to have the choice to opt in and out, and obviously consent management has become a big topic, but it adds legal and technical complexity, which is sometimes a challenge to in reaching through personalization. Then no secret we're in times of shrinking budget, at least in some industries. And I mentioned this partly that obviously it with rising complexity on the customer journey, it becomes more difficult to getting some insights. And out of that storm of challenges, we have now AI, which becomes centerpiece of discussions for many reasons. And it's easy if we think of AI as using LLM, and obviously RAG models and agents are become center of the conversations and center of what's the adoption in marketing, in sales, in service, but also in back office processes. And I think two things I want to mention. First of all, we see value accelerating. I think it's no secret on the different implementation that either time to market, quality, or efficiency is increasing. And at the same time, costs per token are decreasing, which I think is a big reason why we see so much acceleration and so much hype around the tools and solution out there. But I want to make one big point, and I think that's where CDP the first time comes here into play. Out of the different installations, context is becoming key to make agents relevant, and the CDP is becoming mission critical here. It's clear that the impact of AI will only be as good as companies are able to augment the agents with their specific company data. And data needs to be cleaned, it needs to be labeled, it needs to be permissioned, and CDP is becoming, at least for customer data, as one centerpiece to empower your agents. What does this mean for the tech stack? And here, a big shout out, obviously, to Scott Brinker, and to build on what he said a couple of months ago. And I think we're seeing a big acceleration back in the days from best of breed versus best of suite. Where should we go? Should we buy or build? I think we've seen the last years a big shift into platform ecosystems. I think it's to just pick one with I mean the ecosystem of HubSpot, for example, with thousands of companies around them. So it's clear that software has become more into a platform ecosystem play, and custom solutions have been built on top. But I think now we're in a big transition the third time, and it's for a couple of reasons. And I think agents are at the forefront of the change. Why? Because agents are by design composable. You assemble them back with the different data pods, with the different tools, with the different capabilities, and they don't care in a sense at where in the layer they are. So I think the layer is bending as not only the layer as such is converting and embedding different parts of the layer, but the agents compress the layer as they are taking information from different parts of the layer. What does this mean? And maybe let me drill down or double click on that. And we're seeing more from a layered cake. We're becoming a composable campus. And you see here, obviously, there's a lot of agents at the experience layer and the outside where we're interacting or accelerating conversation with the customer directly. But there's also a lot of agent in between, which companies using, again, to accelerate and improve operational performance. And those agents taking data from different layers. And to give you a view on the five layers we're seeing developing, I think the warehouse or your lakehouse becomes the centerpiece, as they not only hold customer data, much more. I'll talk about that in a minute. But we see an evolving umbrella of the integration and semantic layer. What do I mean by that? Obviously, you need a certain revenue is revenue, but cost of goods and sold can be attributed or mean differently by different companies. So it's becoming much more important to add metadata to your data to make the agents understand out of different sources what's the same meaning of the data. I also think the value proposition of CRM, CDPs, DAM is changing. Obviously, the core value is staying, but they become more system of context, delivering those informations they're having to apps and agents. And then around that, obviously, we have the system of engagement, which is doing the orchestration, the decisioning around um, in relation to the experience layer. And what I would like to mention on the right side, we're seeing two zones developing. We're seeing zone one, where we do the heavy lifting. This is the enterprise data ecosystem, where a lot of the, let's say, hard AI, ML lifting is happening. And then we see the customer experience zone, which is much more faster. And again, it's also more accelerating through the new agents interplaying. So there's one macro level, and then there's more a second zone layer, which is then more natural to the marketing organization, and maybe zone one is a little bit more natural to IT and engineering. But the main message I want to give, the canvas is bending. Agents are shifting the layered platform more to an interplay. And we see also the different solutions taking features of the other. I think the CEP platforms becoming to some extent CDPs. We're seeing CDPs now more built out of your data warehouse. That's what we're talking today. So the whole canvas is bending. That's the main message I want to give you. To take one extra level or look on the core data. Obviously, today we're talking about customer data, and again, we will talk about CDP in a minute again. But I just want to say there's much more around it. And I think the other data pillars will become also more important to marketing. Obviously, customers at the center. We need our individuals, our accounts, the event data. That's all what we're used to store and have in our CDPs. But it will become also more important to get more company data around it. For example, supply chain. Hey, where is my order? We give the agent the possibility to interact with supply chain, with customer data, or we take more content information uh, within our um, within our marketing operating model to allow agents to make certain changes. Now, what I want to say here is different parts of the data need to come together. Same for code, but at the end, what are our agents? They're just prompts, prompt templates, and skills, right? They become sort of the new what a journey builder was back in the day. I think we will see code around agents becoming, and then we have the semantic layer just around it to give sense and meaning of the core data. That's just to say there's much more to the data core than customer data. But let's come back to customer data for a second. And I think when we had the pre-discussion, Projjol, about CDP and what's the meaning and what is it all about, I think I tend to say a CDP has to have seven different capability. Obviously, there's different definitions out there, but at least I think that's what a CDP needs to bring to the table in those times. And let me quickly run through it. I think the first part is very well known. CDP needs to be able to ingest data, right? And I think there are big difference out there in the vendors of the amount of connections, be able doing this in real time. And that's the second point for me, being able to transform this data, either do a filtering, do a validation, do an enrichment, do a blocking. We see big difference here out there in the vendors. So those point one and two go together. Then what are CDPs doing? They match and merge different profiles to create one individual view. And I think here again, we see big differences in how you can customize and build those identity resolutions out on individual level, out on account level, out on household level. So point number three is a big difference to look for. And then I think number four is almost table stakes. All CDPs more or less are able to build audiences and work around that. Obviously, there are different nuances in how intelligent you can build this waterfall segmentation, so on and so forth. But I would say number four is not a differentiator. Five is then the way how much possibility as you have to activate the data, again shared with the social networks, paid platforms, but all the other systems out there. What's interesting to mention is that part of the CDPs come with different pre-built possibilities to do calculations, scorings, build affinities. And there's some vendor which tend to say more, that's not our core business, but we have the possibilities to connect with the data warehouses. That's where we recommend companies doing the heavy lifting. So again, something you might want to look at when you're selecting a CDP. And number seven, almost, I think, something which is partly forgotten or looked at from a second perspective, but how much the CDPs are able to customize privacy rules. And can data be segregated? What is data deletion time? Can data be masked? And so on. So there is a lot of data governance features out there. But what does this mean for CDP as categories? And I think there's a lot of attempts to categorize CDPs in the past. And to be honest, I think a lot of attempts have failed. Obviously, David Raab was one of the first ones with the Customer Data Platform Institute who said their data CDPs, analytics CDPs, campaign and delivery. And a lot of institutions out have tried to form their different categories, which I think worked and failed all at the same time. Today, we want to take a very, very simple look at that and say, we want to give you or have a conversation around packaged, pre-built CDPs and composable CDPs, which are built around your data warehouse. And that's where we want to take a deep dive today. So what is it in easy terms? How do a packaged CDP differs from a composable one? And let me try to frame this very simple here. A packaged CDP, as the name suggests, brings all those base functionality with it. CDP, which is able to collect data, do identity resolution, segmentation, and so on. And it's outside of your existing data warehouse. Obviously, it can connect, it can interplay. I talked about machine learning possibilities, but it's outside of your data warehouse. And it's an all-in-one solution. It's vendor hosted. I think that's one of the big differences. And obviously, it's much faster to deploy and it allows much less engineering. On the other side, we have the composable CDP, which is built on top of your data warehouse. So it brings, as you see, the same capabilities. I think that's important to mention. It brings the same capabilities, but it's, let's call it warehouse native, and it's on top of your data. What does this mean in detail? We come to at a later point, but obviously it gives you much, much more flexibility, but it also comes with a couple of downsides. We touch on that, but I think it's important to state those are the, let's say, the two different distinctions out there: a package, pre-built solution, and composable, which is on top of your existing data warehouse. And then maybe one last point, Projjol, before I hand over to you. But here, this is only illustrative, and there are different nuances and hybrid solutions out there. But that's how it could look in simple terms, right? You have your data warehouse where you collect in batch different kind of information. You do your transformations and data governance rules and scoring all in the data warehouse. And then you set up a composable CDP part on top of that, where you say, okay, maybe my real-time information needs to go through my CDP. That's not something I handle within my data warehouse. And you do part of the identity resolution and segmentation in the CDP and use it as an activation layer. And it's just one simple way to show how your data warehouse could interact with a composable solution. I think enough of the theory. I think Projjol, now it's exciting to hear what is Zeotap's, let's say, point of view on that, and how is your system evolving, and yeah, maybe your point of view and your take on that would be good.
Sure. Thank you, Constantino. That was a very comprehensive overview of the last 11 years and 11 slides, I think. So well done. Um, for those who are unfamiliar, maybe just a quick introduction to Zeotap. This is our credibility slide. The Americans like to call this the NASCAR slide. What sort of stands out from this slide is that there really isn't a pattern here. We work with some of Europe's biggest telecom retailers. We work with some of Europe's biggest grocery retailers. FC Bayern is the world's biggest sports club, and Entain happens to be the world's largest sports betting company. So there isn't a theme here, except that they all maintain very large first-party data stores of customer and associated data. And what we attempt to do is build a platform in Europe for Europe. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means for European brands. The three core pillars I'm going to talk about today very quickly, and then we'll probably spend the maximum amount of time on the last one, Infraflex, which is everything around deployment and packaged versus composable. But broadly, our platform is built on three core pillars. The first is Zeo AI, which is everything you read about today around AI and agentic. We were there before. It was cool. We were actually the first implementation of an LLM in the CDP space in production. We've had a long-standing partnership with Google Cloud in this context. We also work with other vendors here. This was not an afterthought or a bolt-on for us. We've really maintained our commitment to AI from the very early days, and this shows through every layer of the stack and the platform. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means across the different stages of the data flow. Audience Boost is something that we're probably best known for, especially in Europe, which is our ability to take a client's first-party data asset and extend it via a proprietary network of identifiers we've compiled from some leading publishers. And what that basically means is that if you as an enterprise are sitting on a pool of identifiers linked to your customers, we can augment or enrich that pool and therefore improve your match rates, typically on the paid media platforms. Higher match rates lead to better media efficiency, better conversion. So it has a very direct and immediate translation to actual value created for clients. And the last one, as I said, Infraflex is our deployment capability, where we believe that the answer is really it depends. There are enterprises for whom the packaged model makes more sense for various reasons I'll talk about in a second. And there are others for whom the composable model is far more relevant. And we believe the answer here really should be horses for courses. You pick the horse depending on the course that you're going to engage with. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But first, let's start with Zeo AI. So Zeo AI is, as I said, built deep into the Zeotap stack, and it really comprises three layers. The first layer and the most important layer is everything Constantine alluded to with regard to context. It's the data layer, and it is the very messy process of taking large amounts of enterprise customer data and transforming it into some kind of structured, enriched, contextualized asset that can be used for any kind of downstream AI use case. And this is typically the biggest and heaviest lift, is that transformation. There isn't a one size fits all. It is entirely contingent on the nature of the first party data store, the nature of the identifiers, the nature of the universe of descriptors and other data that sit, and of course the nature of the underlying use cases that the client is hoping to deliver on. The second layer is probably my favorite layer, as has emerged over the years, is the interface. It is the ability to take this enriched, transformed, AI-ready data asset and make it available to consumers. And really, over the years, the consumers have grown and evolved. And of course, the underlying data model and data structures also evolved to serve those consumers. But very early on, the typical consumers were API based, where they were looking to take the data available in the CDP and use it for different kinds of connectors and such. Increasingly now, there's MCP, a model context protocol, to make where the primary consumer is the agent rather than the human or a data engineer. BYOM, bring your own model, where the consumers tend to be data scientists who are looking to take advantage of this transformed and enriched data layer to train models that can then be executed by the CDP. And of course, increasingly natural language prompts, where human marketers who don't typically have an in-depth understanding of the data asset but would still like to engage with it can do so via conversational interface. So as the universe of use cases grows and the different models of engagement grow, the manner in which this layer is made available also grows and gets richer. But this is really the glue that connects the data to the end activation. The last layer, of course, is the agentic decisioning layer, and this is where you close the loop. Increasingly, this is becoming more and more independent and autonomous, with fewer and fewer manual or human touch points. As agents grow and optimize, and as they become smarter through reinforcement learning, you have the ability to build self-optimizing closed loop execution of different marketing outcomes across paid media, across owned and operated media, and increasingly across the entire customer life cycle through some kind of holistic orchestration, omni-channel across different touch points. So that's everything around Zeo AI in a nutshell. And if you're interested, please do get in touch. Let me tell you a little bit more about how we dive into each of these individual layers. What really stands out is that the layers in themselves, individually and independently, add value, but really where they come together as more than the sum of their parts is when they are combined as an integrated asset. So that's Zeo AI. The next module that I'd like to talk about quite briefly is Audience Boost. And as I said, Audience Boost is really our paid media differentiator, where we take your first party data asset, we link all the different identifiers together, and then we take this consented ID graph that I spoke about, sourced from top tier data partners across Europe and the Middle East, and in some cases globally, and we tag on those identifiers to improve your paid media outcomes. This is quite a unique asset. There's a company called LiveRamp that does this they're almost eponymous with the category in America. As of yesterday, I believe the day before, they were acquired by Publicis. And we have built a very similar modular capability across Europe for our enterprise clients. What does that really mean in terms of outcomes? So the next slide provides some evidence around how this improves match rates and therefore uplift across the platform. So these are some of our clients: Telecom Italia, Douglas, big German beauty retailer, Sky and Virgin, both in the telecom and media space, and of course Entain, which is the world's largest sports betting company I mentioned. So again, a very diversified pool of clients, again, all with very large first-party data stores. So you would imagine that their match rates on the end channels or the paid media platforms are quite high to begin with. But what's evident here is that thanks to Audience Boost, we can augment those match rates significantly and therefore drive greater uplift in those end platforms, and increasingly through CAPIs, the conversion APIs and such, we can optimize paid media conversion to improve the performance on campaigns. So that's Audience Boost. Again, if you're interested, please let us know. The last thing I'd like to talk about today is InfraFlex. And this is what I was saying about the two different options we have available: packaged, the more traditional CDP model, where Everything is provided in a turnkey manner, effectively hosted by us. What's unique to Zeotap is that we can actually host a packaged CDP within the client environment as well. So this is basically taking everything we do in an integrated way and deploying it, rather than deploying it on our Google Cloud environment, deploying on a client Google Cloud environment. This is quite interesting for clients typically in highly regulated sectors where they want the advantages of packaged, but they would still like the CDP to reside within their environment. But this is everything, as I said, it's turnkey, everything's integrated, as Konstantin's slide showed. It comes in an integrated, tightly coupled manner with minimal engineering involvement. It typically works best in scenarios where the primary buyer and or the primary user is non-technical, often from the marketing teams or the customer care teams or somewhere in between, something around customer lifetime value, where they want to get out of the blocks quickly, deploy a CDP, but they don't necessarily want to deal with the deployment of a platform within their own environment. More recently, we have the new breed of CDPs that are warehouse native, that are deployed directly on the customer's data warehouse. In our case, we are agnostic. It could be, for example, Google Cloud and BigQuery. It could be Databricks on any hyperscaler. It could be Snowflake, for example. These are the three big warehouses that we see across our client base. And this, of course, means that the CDP sits as a fairly lightweight application outside of the client environment, but the actual heavy lifting happens client side on the client's underlying data stores. This has distinct advantages around governance in many ways, because it's what's known as zero copy. So the data typically never really leaves the client environment, especially in the more traditional pure play warehouse native scenario. But it comes with its share of restrictions. It also places quite a burden on the client's underlying data engineering teams to ensure that the data stores are optimized, the data models are made available, and that the performance can meet the needs of the business. So it's less heavy from a deployment perspective with regard to or less intrusive, I should say, as from a deployment perspective, but it does place more burden on more of a burden on the client's engineering teams. The two architectures look a little different as a consequence. On the top left, you have the package solution, which is basically everything from one hand, the data layer, which is the identity resolution of the different first-party identifiers, and the catalog management resides within Zeotap, as does the activation layer, which is the delivery of audiences through to the different destinations or last mile platforms. And the data sources typically sit client side. Those could be data coming in from the CRM or the data warehouse. Equally, it could be real-time data coming in from the client's a mobile app or website, streaming. And depending on the nature of the use case, it could be a pure play batch-based deployment, or it could include real-time workflows, but everything happens within Zeotap. Bottom right, composable, and this is where things get a little mixed with regard to how deployment works. Again, for typical batch-based use cases where you can run the workloads on a more traditional data warehouse, the ID resolution, the catalog management, and the segmentation all happens within the client's data stores or within the client's environment. Increasingly, as we move to a scenario where there are real-time decisioning implications and you need more edge-based capability, what happens is that solutions like Zeotap deploy a real-time layer within their own environment that can serve as a low-latency interface for some of the real-time use cases, while still leaning very heavily on the client data warehouse for all of the batch-based use cases and the larger heavier workloads. So there is a distinction there. If as a client, you don't really have anything that requires end-to-end real-time, when I say end-to-end real-time, I mean data flows that need to happen that need to be executed in less than a second, typically in double-digit milliseconds. So we look at 60 to 90 milliseconds. Then you need that low latency capability sitting within the vendor. If not, you can go with a more quote unquote traditional composable deployment that involves, all of the workloads residing within your data warehouse. So again, horses for courses, it could be a pure play composable or zero copy. There could be the need for a vendor side data layer as well. It's a little bit like a cache. And again, this is typically determined by the underlying use cases that clients are looking to deliver on. What we find is that it ends up being a bit of a journey. You start with more of the paid media, batch-based use cases that are easier to execute, require less frequent refreshes, and can show value quite quickly. Just given the scale of paid media budgets, even marginal improvements have huge commercial implications. So that's quite beneficial as a starting point. But over time, as you grow into personalization, in-session optimization, then some of the low latency capabilities become more important. The last thing I'd like to say with regard to the evolution of the space, and it's now been a little over 10 years that we've been doing this. We started in this more traditional SaaS model where the primary consumers were human marketers, and the typical deployment was in the form of packaged SaaS. We grew into the composable space where the nature of the consumer changed from less technical to more technical, and this evolution was catalyzed also by enterprises making huge investments in their own data lakes, in their data warehouses, and asking for ways in which they could augment those investments, leverage those investments, rather than replicating the data in an external data store. And increasingly now, as we grow into an agentic world where the primary consumer is no longer human but an AI agent, we find the need for more edge-based capabilities, more sub-second latency requirements, intent-driven autonomous reasoning, and this has really been a step change over the last 12 to 18 months. The only message I'd like you to take away maybe from this slide is that it's not one or the other necessarily. It could be a combination thereof. And the analogy I like to use is that NoSQL did not replace SQL. So it's not that unstructured data necessarily made structured data obsolete. It was more that you could unlock more value and newer use cases with NoSQL data source or unstructured data. And yet there was a case, and there continues to be a case, I believe there will always be a case for more traditional relational structured data. And really the answer is, again, it depends. Horses for courses, pick the model or some combination thereof that works best for you. Back to you, Constantin.
Great, Projjol. Thanks a lot. Great to see the details and how the platform is evolving. And I want to pick you up because a lot of the listeners might ask themselves, what does this mean for my MarTech stack? And maybe they are at the point of time where they're looking for a CDP or have one and now consider what's the right CDP in the future. And we've broken this down to, let's say, 5 simplified steps of how to now make the right decision. What's the right CDP for your business objective? And I think that's the starting point and the starting question. I think now we talked a lot about technology, but technology in that sense only follows business and the business targets. So I think that's my main message is start from the business objectives. What do you want to achieve with your CDP within your MarTech ecosystem? And out of that, come out with different use cases and different customer journeys to be very clear what's really driving growth, what's driving efficiency, what's driving value for my company, because that then tells you what requirements you have for the different solutions out there. And I think the requirement leads then to what we've started speaking about, which is the right archetype. And that's obviously one part is to look at the requirements and the business needs to solve. But I think there are some, let's say, second order questions you can ask yourself when coming to this point to make a decision. Obviously, if you want to build something on top of your data warehouse, you need to be very clear and you need to be let's say you need to have an honest conversation with yourself. How good is your data warehouse maturity? Um, how good is your data quality and your data engineering skill set? Is this something you're able to pick up on yourself? And with that, how critical is time to market? Because it's easy to say, and it's obviously simple that building something on your own always takes more time than going for a packaged solution. I think that's something to tell out of the last years. And then one question on top of that for me is there something which is really differentiating, or you need to customize something to have a certain advantage or value which is not delivered out of a packaged solution? And then to the hyperscalers, we will come at the later point. And based on that archetype, then you start your vendor evaluation. I think that's the five simplified steps we want to share with you moving forward, making the right CDP decision. I want to double click once more on the pros and cons of packaged and composable solution. I think, Projjol, uh, you have started to talk about that, but let me build on that in in fast fashion here. It's obviously the first point is very easy. If you go for packaged solutions, it's much more constrained, and composable comes with much more flexibility, but also with more responsibility in that sense. Um, I mentioned that the package solution obviously a little bit faster than engineering and building everything on top of your data warehouse for technical reason, but also for organizational reasons. That's also fair to say. And a composable solution is more interoperable. You be schema agnostic, and you can fully customize your identity resolution. But it's also fair that most of the packaged version bring a very robust skill set there. But it might be a differentiating topic to say, hey, I need to build something on my own within my data warehouse. Obviously, the downside, maintenance and operations, it's an higher effort. Operation is much more advanced. Also from an UI business perspective, it's clear that the packaged solution comes more with a more natural interface and operations from a marketer perspective. Um, it's worth mentioning, obviously, with a packaged solution, you're a bit more vendor dependent, and there is a certain lock-in as with every software decision. And last point I want to share with, obviously, with Composable, you need either much more internal resources or a partner who's helping you achieve this. Um, it goes along with there is more engineering, it's building work. So to pack this up, package solutions are faster to deploy, they're easier to run, but in a sense, you trade control for convenience. And Composable in that sense is slower, it's more to manage, but you own the infrastructure and you know the economics. And I think it's up to every company and every individual to decide now what matters more at that point. Also, what's more important in respect to our marketing organization, the way how you work with engineering together. There's every path is unique. That's, I think, the message here. Every solution comes with different pros and cons. But I think interesting, we want to share a very simplified, but I think meaningful comparison on the cost side. And to to start with the main takeaway, there is no easy business answer. I think it packaged and composable cost-wise comes with certain trade-offs, and it also depends on the starting point of your organization. And we draw here a very, very light comparison of a mid-size CDP installation. But we said you have a mid-size CDP installation, you pay 400K. Obviously, with a packaged version, there's a big portion on license cost. There's almost no separate cost for identity resolution, for compute, for ingestion. That's part of the license you're more or less purchasing from the vendor you select. Obviously, there's a certain cost to operations, and we've neglected implementation here because it adds a certain it's adding another dimension here, which we can talk at a later point. But it's easy to say you have very less transparency, you have the package solution, and you pay the most for license. And obviously, depending on the vendor, that can be either for advanced, it can be for profiles, it can be certain costs for real-time capabilities. We see all mixtures on the left side. If we look at Composable, the license cost obviously is not the big portion. And the more complex and the more advanced you're making the Composable setup, the costs on the warehouse side increase. They increase for identity resolution, compute. The more real-time stuff you want to do on your warehouse, your compute cost will accelerate. That's easy to say, and there's a certain cost to ingestion egress. But we cannot neglect this. I mean, that's a factor, but I think the big portion is out of compute. And then you have operations cost, which is also fair to say it's a bit higher than your packaged solutions. What are our key messages here? First of all, for mid-size solutions, the costs are almost the same. But within scale and within customization, it very much depend on or let me say it differently, engineering costs are increasing if you try to progress on your composable solution. The base license is much, much lower, but it's increasing with growing capabilities and growing usage. And I think my main message is here, the business case, again, really depends on your starting point, on your maturity, and how strong your foundation is to really go for a composable. It's easy to say they're similar, but if you grow in capabilities, if you grow in usage and you look at the total cost of ownership, then composable tends within higher usage to be higher over, let's say, 3 to 5 years. Yeah. What does this mean? I think we said this now a couple of times. The appetite and the pros and cons depending on your starting point. Again, to wrap this up, packaged is the right solution if speed and simplicity is what's needed. You have one bill, you have one vendor, pricing is very predictable. Let's say it's the easy ticket. Composable fits if you have complex requirements, if you have a strong warehouse foundation, if you have good data engineering capabilities, good data quality. And obviously the operations is a bit more complex within a multi-vendor setup. And then hybrid is somewhere in between. Projjol, I think you've built on that already. And with Zeotap, there's a solution which can go both ways. The answer, the main message we want to give here, the trade-off is what your organization is able to absorb and build off. Yeah. But there's one caveat we want to give here, and it depends a little bit on your hyperscaler contract. I think it's fair to say that a big number out there obviously have already built data warehouse, and they have a certain cloud commit. And we made here simple math back of an envelope. Again, if we would say you have a cloud commit of 5 million, your current utilization is 3.2, there's 1.8 left. And now it's to put this in simple terms, if you would go for packaged CDP solution, you add another 400K on top, right? If you go for the composable side, you're reducing your waste and get in that sense, for free is a strong word, but you get your composable infrastructure out of that remaining headroom. So it's worth looking at your hyperscaler contract, and you might be able to convert sunk costs in a productive asset here. Yeah. Maybe if we wrap it up, what are our core messages out of today? And again, I want to start with really, if you think about selecting a CDP or building on it and what's the right way in the age of AI, start with your main business objective. Always think this from a use case perspective, what you're aiming to achieve. Be aware agents are really rebundling, upending the MarTech stack. Um, I personally think that we'll see much more of composable solutions as the whole stack becomes much more composable in the future. Um, but there is no universal answer. We touched on that based on your data maturity, engineering capabilities, cloud contract. It's a tough decision to make which archetype and which vendor is the right fit here. Look into your cloud contract. It can be a hidden asset. And if you ask me personally, what is the right question or what does the CDP of the future need to be capable of? The CDPs in the future, they need to close the customer intelligence loop fast enough to feed your agents, to feed your marketing organization of the future. And that's for me one of the main questions besides packaged or composable, to be aware that most of the operations are, let's call it, agent augmented in the future, and a CDP has a critical role to play here, and that's something the CDP of your future should be capable of. Good. Let's have a quick look. We're already in the Q&A section, and I think we have at least a couple of minutes left. Let me check where I can see some of the questions we're having. Let me.
Constantine, if it helps, I have them up here so I can quickly take the first few. There's a question around solutions that enable managing the semantic and control layer, and does Infoflex enable managing the semantic and control layer mentioned in the previous slides? Actually, no. Infoflex is not a semantic layer. Infoflex is a deployment capability, and here I'd like to distinguish the two in the sense that we try to ensure universal capability across the deployment model. So Infoflex is more of the ability to deploy the CDP than it is an actual underlying functional capability of the stack. Yes, the deployment model does dictate to some extent how the semantic and control layers work. But fundamentally, if you wanted to manage the semantic layer, that would happen within the data warehouse, whether that was hosted client-side or hosted within Zeotap. And the control layer would then be determined by the nature of the underlying use cases. Zeotap CDP as a whole often does serve as the control layer, but the semantic layer sits in the data warehouse. A couple of other quick questions. How is Audience Boost different from 6sense? Well, 6sense is more of a revenue intelligence platform. Audience Boost is just a core paid media activation capability where we can augment the results you're already seeing from other revenue intelligence platforms or other paid media platforms and such. So it's one piece of the puzzle. 6sense is a platform unto itself for end-to-end revenue management. One more question here. In the case for Composable, where would the identity resolution and data catalog management happen? In the case for Composable, which is typically warehouse native, everything happens within the client data warehouse. So the ID resolution is client side, the data catalog resides client side. The CDP is used to manage the data model, but the catalog does sit client side. And of course, all of the audience processing happens client side. So it's a distinction between the CDP as the control layer and the warehouse as the data layer. The CDP is used to control the data layer, but everything resides within the warehouse. Those were some of the questions we received, Constantine.
Great. Good. Anything else? Let's give the audience one more minute. While they're thinking, just to build on what you said, I think the semantic and control layer, there's almost a new category emerging. Obviously, you see different vendors out of the different layers try to cover that, but I think it's almost worth an own webinar or own conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Good. Okay, there's one more. Let me read this. Few enterprises today run production agents that consume MCP endpoints or write type words back to customer profiles. What specific contractual or architectural requirements should we set today to preserve a viable path to stage 3 in 12 to 24 months? Wow, Projjol.
Well, look, I think the reality is, and I think this is what the question was alluding to, is that we're still, all of us, including Zeotap, are quite early in this journey, and we're in this journey together. So the question, I think, alludes to how can we ensure that we are future-proof to some extent. And I think contractually, it comes down to so the two questions were, one is contractual, one is architectural. The one contractually, I think increasingly I find that clients are asking, and rightly so, for some degree of schema standardization and schema portability, so that, and of course, there is no prevailing framework in this context, but to the extent that the data model can be largely interoperable and portable, clients are asking for schema portability. So to reduce vendor lock-in, and B, to ensure that the solution is future proof, and that makes complete sense. So schema portability would be one commercially uh, written into the contract. The second one, I think, is increasingly asking for some kind of roadmap commitment with regard to agentic capabilities and support for example, MCP, or support for UCP, which is Google's new Universal Commerce Protocol. Not all solutions, and this is even outside of the Zeotap or CDP context, not all solutions support these capabilities today. And if this is something that you're looking to execute on over the next 12 to 18 months, then I would ensure that the vendor underwrites these commitments on their roadmap rather than just having them as placeholders for some kind of future delivery. Architecturally, I think, and going back to what I was saying, I think that interface layer is critical, because even if, and as Constantine rightly said, all data is context, and the decision you're taking today is really for the future of your context infrastructure, as this slide also says. It is important that the context is available universally to all consumers, internal or external. So it could be, in internal MCP capabilities to ensure connectivity to internal agents developed in-house. It could also be external interfaces with agents from external systems that interface with your context layer. The same is true for APIs. The same is true for natural language prompts, and so on and so forth. So I think increasingly, as important as the context layer is, that interface layer on top that makes the context available to different consumers, internal and external, are equally important, or that layer is equally important. And I think that's something to focus on to ensure that everything you do today from a build perspective is future proof.
Great. Good. No, I think that's it. And I think with 1 minute left, again, thanks to the audience. Appreciate you taking 60 minutes, spending the time with us. Thanks for all the questions. That always is the most fun part of it. If there's any afterthought or things popping up, obviously we're love to connect and exchange. Again, big pleasure, and thanks to you. Have a
Thanks
great.
so much, Constantine.
Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.